So I think that's a really important thing, and there's so much that can be done, and that's why I do have some hope for the future, at least, because there's so many proactive steps that can be taken, and you've got to take a lot of inspiration from people that are already making the effort and out there doing things to help peacefully engage and to try and reach out to other people from different views and to sort of constructively bridge that gap to try and understand both Israeli and Palestinian perspectives on the issue. So I think, from my perspective, I think it is really an issue that can be resolved, but it's going to take a huge amount of effort. And actual fact, I think that it could be an incredibly great thing, if the Jews do have a position where they are upholding the commandments and they are there as a light to the world, and they are there to teach moral laws and a good grounding in morality and in the philosophy of morality. So it is something that we could strive towards in the future. We could strive towards in the present, but we could attain in the future, perhaps. So I've got very mixed views about where things could go in the future. Nobody knows, but I do hope that we'll strive and do everything we can. And one last interesting statistic that I found the other day is that out of Israeli soldiers, they are 5 more times likely to die from suicide than they are from terrorism, in actual fact. And I think that doesn't really surprise me, actually, because the strength of the Israeli military is there. They've got $3.5 billion donated by the Americans. They've got huge resources. Their technological infrastructure is just giant. And ironically, they are like Goliath, and Palestinians are like David in that context, oddly enough. So very few soldiers die in combat, but it's actually Israeli civilians that are much higher risk and that are more likely to die than soldiers in Israel, in fact. The whole situation as it stands, it's really sad for everyone there, and it doesn't benefit anyone in the long term, really. So it's in everybody's interest that the genuine concerns from the Palestinians are addressed and that they are recompensed. And I think that would be such a wonderfully good thing, not only for the Palestinians, but for Israeli citizens too, who have to live with so many accusations and anti-Semitism being mixed in with that. And also under the fear of bombs and terrorism. It's just a terrible thing. Even if it's only a minority of people affected, you never know where or when it's going to strike. So it's still the fear that's prevalent around you. But also, it's also there's accusations as well. And that's the feeling, of course, about your fellow citizens. You don't feel like that same pride in living in a country that's upholding such a system of apartheid that's so unfair and that's dispossessing some people of land and resources and creating really unfair situation there. And I think in terms of the anti-Semitism, it's worth recalling that there are many Jewish people, 6 million living in America. There's a very large number of American Jews, and there were a smaller number of Jews, living in various parts of the world, Iran, and some still in Europe, and there are lots of people with claims to Jewish ancestry in Africa, of course, as well, particularly Ethiopia, but also in other parts of Africa too. And that's another really interesting angle on this, actually. I'll come on to that in a minute. But in terms of the anti-Semitism, you need to be careful about and being clear what is anti-Semitism, because actually if you're critical of the state of Israel and some of its policies against Palestinians, that's not anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is when you're making derogatory, prejudicial remarks about Jewish people in general, okay? So it's important to distinguish the difference between the state of Israel and Israelis and Jewish people. Many Jewish people are not Israelis, like American Jews, European, African Jews, Iranian Jews, for example. And there are many Jewish people in Israel who are not necessarily Zionists. So there are many that don't necessarily believe in the state of Israel or its policies. Or there are many there as well that do believe in the state of Israel, but they don't necessarily agree with a lot of the policies that they currently have towards Palestinians. And so there are a whole range of different kinds of Jews as well. There are the ultra-Orthodox. They make up a small percentage. I think it's about 2 or 3%. Then there are the more moderates who make up a much larger majority. And there are the Sephardic Jews who are have the traditional, the bloodline. And then there are also this 20% of who are atheist Jews. I suppose they're Israeli citizens, and I can understand that they want to live with the family they've grown up with there, and so there probably are agnostic Jews, of course, as well. But coming on to what is a Jew in any case, so there's a very interesting thing about African Jews and that. So the situation with Ethiopian Jews is that over the last few years, there were many Ethiopian Jews that were suddenly allowed in, and I think the whole story that Israel put onto the news is that they were helping rescue some of them from a poverty or difficult situation in Ethiopia, I think. But since then, there have been various issues within Israel over how well they've settled in there. And some people feel that they need to conform more and that they need to sort of give up some of their beliefs, their own type of Judaism, which some people argue is sort of heretical because they lived away from the mainstream of the other Jews. But, that comes down to a central debate of what is Jewishness in any case. So, and whether they should sort of fit in with whatever is mainstream, So if you look at the history, going back, chronicling through the various prophets, there's been different times when the Jews were very distant from God and they did abominable things and they worshipped the golden calf, and they had to be called away from doing such awful things and called back to God and called back to God's laws. So there have been times, when God has been close to the Jews and times when they've been distant as well. So there's been, the type of what is Jewishness has changed, according to that, of course, in times of being devout, they've been close to God, and times of being separate, they've been watered down pagan Jews, I suppose. But I suppose if you look at Ethiopian Jews, the situation there was interesting, because the state of Israel then recognised some of their rights to return to their ancestral homeland. So they allowed some of them, but then they have recently been denying a lot more applications. And there's been a suspicion that some people have been jumping on the bandwagon and saying that they are Ethiopian Jews just to escape Ethiopia or just to get access into Israel. So there's that sort of suspicion as well. And also there's this whole thing of how do you claim that you are Jew? How do you prove that you are even? I'm not aware that there's a blood test that you can take that proves that, personally. I think, I don't really know. I mean, it's interesting because there's so many other tribes, especially with Africa, that also claim a Jewish ancestry as well. So, and I think that they're wary to endorse and to allow many of those to be seen as legitimate. So I'm not aware of whether you can authenticate an actual blood test and whether that's really accurate itself. And I also think, personally, that being a religious of something, being a Christian or Muslim or Jew or Buddhist or pagan or atheist, isn't what your blood is. It isn't in your genetics. It isn't necessarily just that. It's also in your actions. It's in how you behave. It's in your lifestyle. It's in the type of job you do, the type of relations that you have, how you treat other people day to day. that's actually how you live. That's your faith in action, isn't it? Really, that's your dharma. So really, I kind of would say what makes someone really Jewish is actually their choices in their life and how they live, and if they're living in fulfillment of those commandments, if they're adhering to that, if they're honouring their parents as much as they can, if they are not coveting their neighbour's things, but helping their neighbour and making use of their own things, if they are earning things legitimately, if they are protecting innocent life and not murdering them, if they are telling the truth, speaking their truth and not bearing false witness, important things like that. If they are worshipping and honouring God and not worshipping money or drugs or alcohol or other people or angels or demons or weird stuff we've imagined, or ourselves even, perhaps. That's the big one, isn't it? The age of the self. So it's whether we're living in accordance to those sacred commandments. That's, to me, what makes someone, in essence, a true Jewish person. Not because they happen to be born in a certain family, to be honest with you. Although if you are born in a certain family and you're grew up with those customs, of course you can still be very Jewish, and there might be a greater expectation to be. But I think what makes your faith who you are, more generally, whether that's Muslim or Christian or pagan or whatever it is your actions, isn't it? And actions are what makes your character and who you are as a person, So that's kind of my own belief on that anyway. So I think it's a really fascinating situation there. I went to a vigil recently, which was really actually a protest, and I wasn't sure whether to protest about it. And I'm still not sure, because I still want to find out more information about it, really. And so I'm intent on watching more documentaries and doing more research from a variety of sources, just to find out how reliable information is, and just to find out as comprehensive information about it all as I can. I really want to find out from both sides, because in any conflict, what they say is the truth is always the first victim, because often every side has propaganda. Somebody's giving out this side of the story, someone else is giving out that side of the story. That happens in any kind of dispute, always. So like when a family breaks down, this side of the family are going to give this version of the story that makes their cause look better and makes the other side look worse, and the other side are going to do the opposite. And then you get some people in between, so you've got to look at both sides, and you've got to look at a variety of sources. And that's what I'm going to try and do, and get myself educated on it more, because I realise it's a situation I should know a lot more about in my position. I just felt when I went to this protest, there were people there that seemed to know a lot more than me. They were quoting information, and I felt like, I've got poverty of information, and I need to investigate this issue a lot more, because I think it is something that's really important, not just to the geography and the politics and the religion. So it's got a multi-dimensional layer of importance, really, and it's something that I should have studied a lot more of, and I'm intent to study a lot more of too. And I think there's a lot more for me to learn, and I hope other people will too. And I do suspect somehow that that going there is probably the best way to find out more, because otherwise you're just finding out secondhand information about what the situation is. I think that I could tell someone my own experiences and what I'm going through, but then if somebody else tells someone else those experiences, then it becomes watered down and a bit less accurate, like Chinese whispers. So I think probably direct first-hand accounts are probably the best way to find out really what's going on in a situation. So I guess it may come to that, but I think it's better to sort of research as much as you can. That's my intentions, and I really think it's a really interesting issue that everyone has got, especially some people have got some connection to, really. And I think there's a whole range. What's interesting is how those different subjects connect within that, you know, like the religious angle to it all, the political dimension, the geographic centrality, where Africa, Asia and Europe all meet each other. So, you know, it's really, and historically as well, of course, because that land has had so much history over so much time. I mean, you could talk for hours, days, weeks, months, and still scratch the surface of that history. I mean, it just goes back to ancient times, doesn't it? And it's changed hands so many times, and probably will continue to as well. So yeah, my post, and these that's my post on Israel, and really that's all the most important thoughts that I've got about it all. And I think I've got a lot more research to do about it all, and